Okay, welcome everybody to today's Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Community Committee meeting. The first item of business we have is the Cameron Park Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District. I guess Justin and Keegan will be leading this discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. And good morning, council members. Justin Romero with Planning and Development. I've got just a brief presentation to kind of recap our discussion from last time and reintroduce the Cameron Park NCOD proposed overlay district exchange. Bear with me while I pull up the presentation. Everyone seeing that okay? Sure. Okay, so just to recap briefly from our last meeting, this is an application for an external text change that was filed in February of this year for modifications to the Cameron Park NCOD. It's an NCOD that was established in 2006 and modified several times in recent years. As you'll recall, the item was referred to this committee from the May 18th City Council meeting and discussed at your meeting in this committee last month on September 28th. So this slide shows the affected area. It's about a little over 300 residentially zoned parcels. This is the Cameron Park core area. Councilmember Buffkin, I believe, last meeting you asked about the difference between the core area and the transition area. The area outlined in red here is the core area where the existing and proposed rules would apply. The transition area is essentially the two parcels that you see on the southeast or bottom right corner of the screen, which is the Raleigh Elementary School and the St. Mary's School. And those parcels just have some height limitations, but would not otherwise be affected by either the existing regulations or the proposed changes. And so the applicant's proposing a host of changes, just to briefly run through them: a reduction in minimum lot size from the existing, which is just under 22,000 square feet, down to 10,000 square feet, a new minimum lot size for both single-family homes, single-family home lots, and townhome lots. So 6,000 and 4,000 square feet, respectively. The minimum townhouse lot size is a change since our last discussion. Proposed minimum front setbacks are being altered to have a requirement that they be within 20% of the average setbacks along the block face. That's a change from 10% today, and also a new minimum 20 feet as well. So within 20%, but no closer than 20 feet. Modified garage entrance setbacks, wherein on corner lots, garage elevations would have to be set back 5 feet as opposed to the existing 10 feet requirement that detached garages be set back at least 4 feet from an alley. There is a new gross floor area maximum being instituted for accessory structures and ADUs of 600 square feet for one-story structures and 1,200 square feet for two-story structures. There is some building envelope changes for essentially all structures, principal structures as well as accessory structures and ADUs, where essentially height is limited in close proximity to the property line, but is allowed to increase as you step back further into the property. And then one other change that has been made since our last meeting was the removal of the limitation on grading and fill on lots within the NCOD. So this slide will just shows the potential lot and density yields. The neighborhood contains parcels that are both R6 and R10 zoned. Essentially here you see they're largely the same, with really the only difference being for detached houses in the R10 portion. There's a slightly lower yield in the NCOD rules based on the slightly larger minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet as opposed to 4,000 square feet in the base R10 zone. So the split between R6 and R10 is not equal. However, you can see here on this slide, key takeaways that the vast majority of lots, about 81%, are in the R6 zoning. And given the average lot size within the neighborhood of 9,157 square feet in R6 and 9,556 in R10, that the average lot could be subdivided in the neighborhood into at least a 2-unit townhouse development. So, of course, you've got several options. You can, the committee could recommend authorization of the text change either in part or in whole. Could choose not to authorize it or hold for further discussion. If ultimately authorized, staff's recommendation would be that we continue to work with the applicant on some of the building envelope language just to make it a little more clear and easier to understand, as well as aligned with some existing language in the code. However, for what it's worth, staff has met with the neighborhood, had good discussions since their last meeting, and I think it's safe to say there's a much higher comfort level at this point than the previous version due to the changes that we discussed. But we would still like to work with them if authorized to kind of tweak that language about the building envelope requirements. Procedurally, if authorized, there would be a neighborhood built characteristics study. The results of that study would be mailed to property owners and tenants within the affected area. There would be a neighborhood meeting. And then from that point, it would essentially follow the path of a typical text change, wherein it would be posted on the public portal for comment, reviewed and recommended by the Planning Commission and or one of its committees, ultimately sent back to the full council for a public hearing, which would also be noticed. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you. Could we take down the presentation? Thank you. First, I want, Councilman Cox, I wanted to ask if there's anybody on the line who would like to speak to this issue. Alan?
Yes, Mayor. I can check, and we have.
I see a couple of names: Ted Van Dyke, Michael Stevenson, and I'm wondering if there's anybody else who signed up to speak.
There were approximately 4 other people who signed up.
Okay, could we get them on the line and hear from them first?
Yes, we'll start with Mr. Stevenson. Did you want to speak, Mr. Stevenson?
I can briefly. As was noted, this is would be the third text change amendment since NCOD was created. These are a series of refinements, and this latest one is simply to make the text, we believe, match more closely with the built form of the neighborhood. And the most consequential in our mind is reducing the maximum lot size. The purpose of that is to prevent the combination of the typical lot size, which is about 2/10 of an acre, to prevent the combination, which would enable the construction of overly large houses, which we see in other neighborhoods. So we believe that maintaining that lot size, which is really goes to the core of the scale of development of the neighborhood, is very important. The other ones are simply refinements to the language that result from studying the actual built environment and measuring the existing built development. And finally, as far as accessory structures, The intent of that is simply to simplify the language around the construction of accessory structures, including ADUs. It makes no distinction between the use of that structure, whether it's for a garage or a studio or an ADU. And again, that goes to the historical development pattern within the neighborhoods, within our neighborhood, where those structures have been used for many different purposes, including dwellings, as well as carriage houses and studios. So the overall goal is simplification and refinement without, a major overhaul of the intent of the NCOD.
Okay,
Next individual is Carolyn Cheese. Carolyn, did you want to speak?
I'm sorry, I must have signed up for the wrong item. I'm signed up for the Lead Mine Road.
Okay, and we can make that will be next, ma'am. Okay. Next person is on our list is Joe Dewey. Mr. Dewey, did you want to speak to this topic? Okay. The next individual is Molly McBride. Molly, did you want to speak to this topic?
No, sorry, I was here for the other item as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's all, Mayor. That's all that we have.
is Ted Van Dyke on the line?
Ted Van Dyke is here. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Ted.
I believe that he would probably want to speak on this as well.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just speak briefly. I think Michael covered most of our points. I do also just want to point out that Cameron Park is a National Historic Register District. And we've had this NCOD in place for over a decade. One of the things that makes us unique is that we are one of the few neighborhoods in Raleigh that actually has alleys. And so the relationship of our both our primary homes and our accessory dwellings is a little different than elsewhere in the city, and the NCOD is a good way for us to articulate our rules for development and redevelopment in a way that matches that unique circumstance. Obviously, we want to preserve and enhance the neighborhood, and as Michael pointed out quite rightly, I think we're the only neighborhood in the city that has lot maximums to prevent overly large development rather than lot. And our lot minimums, I think, with Justin and staff's help, have come more into conformance with the UDO language, and we have made sure in this latest version that we include provisions for townhomes, as we all know that we're trying to make sure that we broaden our palette of housing options in the city. Appreciate your consideration.
Okay, thank you. Alan, anybody else who's here to speak to this issue?
Todd Rankin, Rankine, Rankine, sir, are you here to this topic?
Yes,
Okay, you are now, can you now speak, sir?
well, I was only speaking if I was a specific question that I needed to address.
Okay,
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Then we will bring this back to the table. Councilor Cox, you'd raised your hand. You have a question.
Yes, that was regarding the townhouses. Their comment was made that the average lot could be subdivided to allow the construction of townhouses, and I was wondering how that compares to the current situation.
In the average, the typical lot in Cameron Park has 60 feet of frontage. And so this new provision would allow one of those lots to be divided into two lots for the construction of townhomes.
And that's not possible under the current conditions?
Well, currently, on a 60-foot lot, it wouldn't be economical to build a single townhome.
Okay. All right. Okay, I guess one of my concerns is that if people suddenly come in and start buying up property and subdividing and building townhouses, then that could really fundamentally alter the characteristics of this area. And so that's just an observation for right at the moment.
Correct. I will point out that there already are townhome developments historically on Woodburn Road.
Mhm.
There's some of that, yes.
I mean, I live out near Bedford. Bedford was actually designed to have neighborhoods with alleys, and in many cases, there are townhouses that are built along those alleys, and that's perfectly fine. And I don't have a problem with that. I guess the question in my mind is for this particular area, this is a rather dramatic departure from what is currently there, and so I'll just make that observation for now.
So this will still have to go through a process
Mhm.
with the neighborhood and whatnot. There will be public hearings. Let me ask one other question. How thoroughly has this been vetted with the neighborhood before bringing it to us?
Mayor, this has been in process for now probably 2 years. We have a development committee, which is comprised of roughly a dozen neighbors. And it's been presented in its various drafts to the larger neighborhood association in multiple meetings and discussed, and we've received feedback. And the current draft reflects input from neighbors and concerns that have been expressed.
Okay. The staff recommendation, can you repeat that again, please?
Yes, Mayor, our only recommendation would be that if you choose to authorize it, that we be able to work through the drafting process with the neighborhood to further refine the one or the two provisions for maximum building envelopes for accessory structures and ADUs and principal buildings. Just to, we don't necessarily have any concern with the purpose or the result of the regulation, just to further refine the language to make it a little more readable and maybe hopefully line it up with some existing language that's in the code today.
Okay. Well, I'm going to make a motion to authorize that we go through that we allow the text change process to take place, and further that we ask staff to work through the drafting process with the neighborhood as you have recommended.
That'd be my second, Mayor.
Okay, seconded by Councilmember Fort. All in favor? Okay, that passes unanimously, clerk. Thank you. All right, next we have rezoning Z 5320. We have a number of people signed up to either hear or speak on this. I'm going to start with staff for an update.
Good morning, Madam Mayor, council members, Travis Crane, Planning and Development here. This is a rezoning request, Z5320, that has been presented to committee a few times. It was last at your September meeting, and staff was asked to have some conversations with the interested parties in the area. And I'm happy to give a recap of that discussion. Before I do, first I want to thank the residents for graciously inviting me to come out and speak with them. So I spent a few hours with them out on the back porch, and we had some conversations about their experience with the rezoning request and the specifics of this case. So we talked through a number of different items. And again, I'm happy to go into detail about our conversation. I believe and think that it was a very positive conversation that we had, focused again on process and the specifics of this case. Just to reset this request here, this is a rezoning approximately 5 acres from residential 4 to residential mixed use 4 stories. The staff report that's contained within your backup material speaks about a more recent development. I want to provide a little bit more clarity and precision on that statement. So there's a note that relates to some exchange of information between the applicant and the neighborhood group. And the staff report notes that the applicant presented two options that were viable or under consideration. It would be more precise to say that the applicant was just identifying a couple of different scenarios and wished to gauge interest from the neighborhood on either of those scenarios. I would make it clear that an alternative development plan has not been submitted to the city and is not part of the zoning case, but it has been discussed by both parties. And I would allow for either the applicant or the neighborhood folks to weigh in a little bit more in depth on that subject. But just wanted to point that out in our staff report. I do have a very brief presentation if you'd like to see it. Alternatively, I can step out of the way and allow for the applicant and residents to speak. It's your preference.
Travis, if we could see your presentation, that could be helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. So give me one moment and I will transition to the PowerPoint. And y'all let me know if you're not seeing it correctly. All right. So again, just to recap, this is a request for about 5 acres of land that is currently zoned residential 4. A request is for residential mixed use 4 stories, parking limited with zoning conditions. Planning Commission saw this spring and they recommend approval 4-3. And the planning commissioners who voted in opposition to the motion stated that this was not consistent with the comprehensive plan and was not in the public interest. So here's an aerial view of the site showing that it's mostly wooded. There are some structures that front on Lead Mine Road. This property is directly south of Inman Park. On the very extreme southern edge of this slide, you can see Hillcrest Road that serves a number of single-family detached structures. All of this on the east side of Lead Mine. So you might recall that last time we had a conversation about this case, staff mentioned that the conditions were essentially locked in place, and that's a function of the code. Public hearing occurred this summer, and once the public hearing closes, there is a window of 30 days where conditions can change to be more restrictive. We have passed that window, so the conditions that you have in your backup packet are what exist for the case. So there's a limitation on principal uses on the property. There is a limitation on the total number of congregate care units on the property of 185, and that's been an evolving standard throughout this process. There are conditions related to building setback, specifically paying attention to the northern property line, and then tree conservation or tree area that would be also abutting the northern property line. The condition continues on that if trees can't be saved, there would be a protective yard that is applied, and the protective yard includes trees and shrubs. And then finally, there are conditions about the eastern property line and trees that abut that property line, and condition about runoff limitations. So this is related to stormwater, fairly common condition that we see in areas where stormwater is of concern, where a higher level of detention is required. So keying into that 25-year storm, it's been offered here. Just for reference, the code standard is 2 and 10-year storm. There are conditions that relate to the lighting, both parking lot lighting and pedestrian lighting. And so again, the focus here is minimizing the impacts on the northern property line or the neighbors to the north here. Limitations on the location of trash, storage and collection and loading docks. So trying to keep that a good distance away from the northern property line. And then finally, I think we've got a couple more conditions that go through here. One of the newer ones is about a transit easement along Lead Mine Road that would be dedicated. There is a transit stop now on Lead Mine, and what this condition intends to do is just to evaluate of that transit service here on Lead Mine Road. And this aligns with standards that are contained within the code for development of this scale and size. So pad would be put in place, a shelter and bench and a trash receptacle, and then connectivity to the sidewalk. The applicant has offered that they would not make a connection for sewer lines onto Wysong Court, and that's to the north. And that was an important point of discussion because there are a number of different places where sewer connection could occur. And the neighbors were concerned about making that connection to the north. There was an analysis made by Solid Waste, and that likely would not be a point of beneficial connection. So the applicants have offered a condition stating they will not make that connection. And then there is a condition that would require the applicant to evaluate a traffic signal here on Lead Mine Road, and it's through an analysis and a consideration of offering up a letter of credit that can be used in the event that a traffic signal is put in place. And that letter of credit would be held for a period of 5 years. If the warrants are met for a new traffic signal, then that money would be pulled to install a signal. So as I mentioned, the Planning Commission did recommend approval of this request 4-3. So 4 votes in favor, 3 votes against. A number of policies that were cited as being consistent related to land use and urban design. As I mentioned, the dissenting votes did not agree with that assertion or policy analysis, and cited instead they believe that the request was inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Mayor, you on mute.
Sorry, do we have any questions of Travis?
We have a number of people online, ma'am, starting with Jamie Schwedler. Jamie, you can speak.
Thank you, Mr. Travis. I don't know if any committee members wanted to ask any questions of Mr. Crane before I begin.
No, nobody indicated
Okay.
they had a question, so no, we'll hear from the applicant.
Thank you. I'll split my time with Mr. Graywall, who's already on the line. This is Jamie Schwedler with Parker Poe. And just to do a quick recap, we appreciate Mr. Crane's recap in detail, but I'll just kind of remind the committee of where we've been and kind of how we are before you today. So after the case was before council in May, referred to this committee, we met in June, August, and September. And in the June meeting, we were asked to meet with the neighbors before finalizing our conditions by the UDO deadline of July 1st. We had that meeting, explained the impacts of the additional requests that had been made by the neighbors, including additional setbacks and things that had been considered throughout the course of the case and had already become part of the case. We also entertained additional requests from the neighbors and offered final conditions in response to their requests, which included screening of retaining walls, contributing to the traffic signal that Mr. Crane just described, and installing the transit infrastructure on Lead Mine. The neighbors did not respond to these before they became final on July 1st. And so we came back to you in August presenting those final conditions, and we were asked to provide information on 2 items: the height of the retaining walls and whether the owners of the property on Fieldcrest that we didn't have under contract would all agree to annex their property so that the city could complete road improvements on Fieldcrest beyond the scope of this rezoning case. We did that, came back to the committee in September, presented answers on those 2 topics as requested, and explained that the retaining wall wouldn't be visible from the Inman Park side until about the halfway point of Mr. Gibson's adjacent property, and then only a limited amount as you went toward the southeast edge of that property line, getting up to about 12 feet on the northeast corner. We presented diagrams and our renderings approximating what that might look like in response. Sorry?
I'm sorry, what? Mr. Cox, did you have a question? Um,
I'll proceed if that's all right.
Please do.
Thank you. We explained that the renderings were our best attempt to approximate to the neighbors what those retaining walls would appear to be, although we cautioned the committee and the neighbors that these were our best attempts and at renderings at this stage. And that we noted that although the retaining wall would have some exposure, it would be shielded by the 32-foot buffer to the north and the 50-foot buffer to the east that we had already committed to as part of this case and became final conditions. Mr. Graywall then explained that he contacted owners of the property on Fillcrest that we were not under contract with and did not control, but that not all of the Fillcrest owners responded agreeing to be annexed, and that this would have to occur in order for improvements on Fillcrest to be made. And I think there was thorough discussion on that at the last committee hearing. Following that discussion, Councilmember Cox indicated that he would like us to consider withdrawing the case and resubmitting a case that the neighbors could support. Neighbors in this case, speaking previously, had expressed support for a townhome case, but had not been specific on the plan or the density, so we explored what that could mean. Under the missing middle text changes that occurred during the course of this case, we believe that the R6 designation could now support about 36 townhomes, and that the R10 designation could be closer to 54 townhomes. So Mr. Graywall reached out to the neighbors to understand exactly what it would be that they would support, cautioning them that this was not an offer to withdraw the case, but to understand per Mr. Cox's instruction what type of townhome development the neighbors represented they would support. And I'd like Mr. Graywall to just explain what that exchange entailed, what they considered, and what the decision has been. And then I'll wrap up the case with just a few points. Mr. Graywall?
Graywall, you can.
Yep, can you all hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Avi Graywall, Sing Development, 2601, Suite 203, Weston Parkway, Cary, North Carolina, 27513. Yeah, I think Jamie did a good job of explaining what's gone down on the case so far and since the last meeting, but we received after my email to the neighbors that have been part of this case so far. I reached out to them to see, what town per Councilmember Cox's request, what type of townhome zoning they would support, and knowing that when we've discussed in the past, that's not something we typically do. We don't do less than 50 unit type of townhome communities. Usually it's part of a much larger campus, whether it being a senior housing community or some sort of intergenerational project, similar to something we're doing out here in Cary. And Mr. Isley, one of the neighbors in this case, responded with a very thorough email on specifically what they would support, which was a 32 unit townhome plan of high end townhome type of for sale housing. And so we took that email, had a chance to internally analyze it, just to really explore if it's something that we could do. And we got back to them and said, it's just not it's just not part of something we do. And two, it would be a very extensive renegotiation with property owners that, are frankly very tired of what's gone on with this case as well. And I don't think they would want to renegotiate. And I think from the indication I get from them, they would probably just, not want to move forward with us and proceed with some sort of by right type of development. So that's kind of where we left it. And, I responded to them in email, all the neighbors in email last Friday, explaining all this. And that's where we're at today.
Thank you, Mr. Graywall. And if I could just wrap up what that means, we believe that means for this case and where it is today is that after given the opportunity to explore that option, Sing Development is not in the position to withdraw the case or be able to make the deal work with that 32 townhome request or indication of support from the neighbors. Which leaves us with the case as it came forward with the final conditions under that July 1st deadline by the code. And I think it sets up a stark contrast, and we understand the neighbors wanted, in their words, the 32 townhomes, which they believe could be sold for, luxury townhomes over $600,000. We began this case with 350 units. We plan to have multifamily and congregate care, with the multifamily offsetting the costs of the senior services, so that we can not only provide congregate care, but we could also provide additional housing product and do it in a way that made sense in the economies of scale. But due to the pressures in this case of reducing the density and trying to accommodate some of the requests from the neighbors throughout, the case now was dropped to 185 units, all congregate care. And that was made necessary by the continued setback requests and height requests, as well as the overall density requests that we received throughout the case. And so now at 185 units, they can't be subsidized by the multifamily product any longer. Those costs can't be offset. And so what that means is, with this reduced yield, we have a higher cost per unit due to the existing contract price and the cost of land, which has only increased since this case has been filed. But still, that's more economical and provides more housing product than the 32 townhome proposal that the neighbors asked us to consider. And more importantly, it frees up 185 homes for seniors who are currently trying to move into congregate care or senior care that don't have enough supply. Right now, there are folks living in homes that, even if they would like to move, the cost of new homes in this market is very challenging, and the availability of beds is very challenging. And so by moving forward with this case at 185 senior homes or senior units, we'd be freeing up additional product for folks to move into this area and be able to have additional product that exists here today, and put those seniors in a place where they have more centralized options for their care, and more centralized patterns of care and getting to services that can be delivered to them in this area. And overall, that is in the better interest of the citizens of Raleigh to have those services consolidated, so folks aren't moving out into the distant areas, rural areas where those services don't exist, or they're too far from their medical services or grocery delivery, for example. And it's also better than the buy right alternative, which we believe is a viable alternative for these sellers if this case is not able to be approved. That would be at the existing zoning, the R4 zoning, about 20 single family homes that would likely be well over $600,000 a piece, just given the way our market has valued single family homes and in this location. And so with that, we just note that we appreciate the staff's designation that this request, as it is consistent with the 2030 comprehensive plan. It's consistent with the future land use map. It's consistent with the urban form map, and the Planning Commission has voted to approve it. And with that, we request that the committee take action today to move this plan back to council for action on the existing conditions as they are today. We appreciate everyone's time and consideration as it moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for the applicant? Okay, we will hear from members of the community who are on the call. Alan?
Yes, ma'am. The first person we have is, excuse me, is Angie Brandt.
Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. It's good to be back here with you all. I think that there's a collective sigh whenever this year-long and widely contested case is mentioned. I know everyone is ready for this case to be over. As Mr. Graywall said, the property owners are tired of this case. I can assure you, so are the thousands and thousands of us who live and commute here. And I know your inboxes will be lighter when this case is over, but I just want to remind you all that for the past year, we've been highly engaged and committed to working faithfully for this process so that it could be equitable for everyone involved. And I'm proud that we've worked so well as a steering committee to try to find compromise. We were tasked with finding compromise by Mr. Bufkin at the onset of this case. And I believe that we've done everything that we have been asked to do. We've made ourselves available, clearing our schedules to meet with the developer. At their requested dates and times, we've been and remain solutions oriented for increasing density in this area. And I really thought that we would be talking about a solution today. As Mr. Crane suggested, I would like to talk to you a little bit more about what's happened since our last committee meeting. So as you've heard a little bit already, on Thursday, October 14th at 5:14, we were in the middle of our meeting with Mr. Crane. That was, the outcome of the last committee meeting. And Mr. Graywall's email came through for our feedback about R6 or R10 townhomes on the site. I'd like to read that to you real quickly, and I do respect everybody's time, so I'll make it brief. The neighbors who have opposed the current case have publicly expressed support for a new zoning request for a townhome project several times. We do not have authority to file such a case, and there is no guarantee the landowners would agree to withdraw the current application and go through another rezoning effort. But in order to evaluate that, we would need to know exactly what density of townhomes the group would support. He continued to outline allowances for R6 and R10. Personally, I felt like we were finally heading in a direction of mutual benefit and that the email came through at a good time because Mr. Crane was with us, but it did derail our momentum during the meeting, to talk about what you all directed us to talk about. It shifted our focus to the task at hand, which was to respond to townhomes within 2 business days. That was the request from Mr. Graywall. So we were encouraged by the possibility. We responded by his deadline on October 18th that, quote, we would support an R6 townhouse only development up to the 36 units you proposed without reservation. And also, quote, regarding your second option, we would be willing to discuss the parameters of an R10 townhouse only development up to the 54 units you specified. We did include the alternative plan for the R6 townhomes that we had drawn up at the suggestion of Mr. David Knight, whose constituents did likewise for that Red Barn lot up Glenwood Avenue. Our plan was less dense than the R6 at 36 units, but we shared that with Mr. Graywall just as a sign of good faith to demonstrate how serious we were about the perceived offer for townhomes. We told him we would be willing to accept more density than our alternative plan that we shared with him. Today, we're here because I guess townhomes are off the table or were never on the table to begin with. That news came at 5:13 on Friday night. After deadlines to submit any presentations or visuals that we would have liked to have done, passed. This has happened before with our city council meetings. It happened in June. It happened in May when we heard from them at 8:10 p.m. the night before the city council meeting. And that was 8 months into a case in which they had yet to even meet with us in person. And I'm saying that because I want to reiterate what I said last month, which is that this case has been drawn out, not by us or our lack of effort. And it's important because on Friday in his email, Mr. Graywall said that townhomes are, quote, not an option we can pursue. To make feasible sense of this plan, we would have to go through an extensive renegotiation with the property owners, both on timing and purchase price. And at such a low yield and swiftly rising land prices, we don't believe we could reach an agreement on price. No mention was made if they had discussed this with the landowners, as they had said in their first email, or if the landowners would even agree to withdraw the current application and go through another rezoning effort. Instead, we heard it wasn't a financially sound choice for them, and I get that. And I'm really sorry that this case has taken so long and that property values have gone up. I know it's a blow to their bottom line, and I know that no one wants to hear about Z5320 anymore, but we've said time and time again, and we've bent over backwards to try to be reasonable for compromise. We didn't float that idea to our neighbors about townhomes until after we responded to Mr. Graywall's email on the 18th. In fact, our neighbors had never even seen the alternative plan because we weren't about to share anything with them when it wasn't a possibility. We're not the ones saying no here. Every step of the way, we have been told no by the developer, or that this is not something more that they can do, or it's only the best they can do because this is a, quote, small 5-acre site. They haven't offered conditions comparable to other cases in the area. Hillcrest Road needs to be up to city standards before any increase of density is allowed. I've requested a small area study since the very beginning of this case, and I continue to beg for it because with almost 20 acres, that means it's really important the city gets this right. We're not asking for single family homes to stay in this area. We have never asked for that. We have constantly asked for townhomes, which is an upzoning, and it would provide a considerable amount, I think between 108 to 180 townhomes on that area. If you take the area as a whole, that would help with the people having access to the transit while providing a considerable amount of the much needed and much talked about missing middle. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and I'm sure the others from the steering committee have more to add, and I just thank you for your time and hearing us out today.
The next individual we have, Mayor, is Kevin Gard.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is Kevin Gard, it's 1644 Standard Trail. So I'd like to sort of restate this case. One of the reasons why we're here for so long has been that this particular case has had so many complex issues that we've been trying to work through. There was the somewhat aggressive upzoning to RX7 in the beginning, which is surrounded on three sides by residential development or future residential development. The site is on a challenging topography of 5 acres that slopes 50 to 60 feet, which exaggerates building heights to the surrounding residential area. There's been the continuing discussion about the NCDOT State Road Fillcrest and its need to be upgraded. And then finally, on the frontage of the property is Lead Mine Road, which is this busy thoroughfare, and traffic's been discussed numerous times without any real resolution. So we have these complex issues surrounded by residential. And if there's one reason why we're here, it's really because of communications. In the very beginning of this project, all of these complexities were the applicant tried to talk through some of them with the neighborhood or with the neighbors, but we really didn't make any progress in explaining how the complexities of this case could be addressed within the concerns of the neighbors. And this led to all of the actions of the Raleigh Planning Commission and the Raleigh City Council in asking the applicant to come back and work through these issues. And the difficulties in communications in the beginning of the project really wasted quite a bit of time. If we'd focused on these issues, maybe we could have made quite a bit more progress before this point. And even today, with the reports of following up on some of the requests from this committee, it's more of investigating individual communication items and then coming up kind of with unsatisfactory results as far as resolving the issues in this case. So one of the reasons why the alternative plan that's been discussed since the Raleigh Planning Commission of considering townhomes in this area is that if you can't solve a lot of these problems directly, as we've seen through all these efforts, one of the answers is to reduce the density, reduce the impact to each of these items by reducing the density. So that's the big reason why we've held on to what we think is compatible for this area. What fits in with the residential. It doesn't solve all the other problems, but it reduces the impact of all of them. So I'd just like to say that there's been a lot of work, a lot of trying to work through these issues. We haven't been able to satisfy many of them, and it really comes down to communication. Thank you for this time.
The next individual we have to speak is Prior Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Prior.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam Chair, should your committee decide to send this issue back to council, I think I can speak for most of the neighbors we've been talking to over the last year. We would respectfully urge that this committee take the time to consider that this upzoning is going from a neighborhood R4 to an oversized island of essentially an R37 that's outside the city limits. We've had these conversations now going on 20 or 30 times between the neighborhoods, close to a dozen times with staff and the applicant, and it's just too much. We've tried to find the middle. We keep getting the rug or the pulled out from under us with sometimes seems insincere. And I'd like to point out two things that have been said today that I have to gently disagree with. If this application and this 5320 was consistent, we wouldn't be here. We would not have spent a year of everybody trying to get what they needed and wanted if this was an acceptable use that was already allowed. So with that said, I would respectfully ask the committee, should you decide to move this, to ask council to not approve this upzoning, to hold the neighborhood's feet to the fire. We would waive any requirements or waiting periods to allow an appropriate residential or townhome use. We've said that out loud multiple times, and we just think the right thing should prevail here. We appreciate everything that you have done, Mayor, and all the council members for allowing us to speak. But at the end of the day, doing what's right for Raleigh and its neighborhoods is what's at stake here. And this upzoning.
I don't know if anyone can hear me, but I have no audio.
We can hear you, Councilmember Cox.
Well, I'm done, Madam Mayor. Thank you, and please let's fix this before the next 15 acres beside this property is put in the same kind of ice. Thank you.
The last individual we have is Matthew Easley.
Thank you, Matthew Isley, Mayor and members of the committee. Thank you for your time on this today again. We appreciate your attention to this important issue for our neighborhood and others around Crabtree, where other projects like this are going to be proposed, some inside the Crabtree City Growth Center area and some outside. In his email to us Friday, declining our acceptance of the townhouse concept he had floated the week before, Mr. Graywall stated his view that his proposed project was a better use of the property. And I get that. If I were a developer, I would probably make that same argument. By the same token, many of our neighbors think the current R4 zoning is the best and most appropriate use of the property, or even a neighborhood park, something we don't have nearby. But our steering committee has emphasized to our neighbors all along the importance of our being realistic and reasonable. And that is why from the very first Planning Commission meeting way back in February, we proposed townhouses as a reasonable upzoning and redevelopment that would add density, much needed missing middle housing, and city tax base without threatening the established single family neighborhoods around it. Twice, I personally asked Mr. Graywall in person to build townhomes there. He said then, as he says now, that he probably couldn't do that. We have met with the applicants and with city staff in good faith every single time the Planning Commission or the council has asked us to. We've had thorough conversations. We've never indicated our support for anything on this site other than townhouses. When Councilman Knight came out to walk the site with us, we told him that we were surprised that he had been able to persuade the council to reject a one-story daycare center off a 6-lane federal highway, one of Raleigh's busiest and biggest commercial corridors. When I asked him what had made the difference in that case in his district, Councilman Knight said the neighbors had come up with an alternative rezoning they could support. And that seemed to make a difference to the council, and he suggested that we try to do the same. So we then did that. Unlike neighbors in the Red Barn case and some others that have been controversial, we did not hire a lawyer to represent us. We worked as volunteers on a shoestring budget. When the professional engineer who created our alternative plan came back with 31 units, I asked him to add one where there seemed to be room for it, which he did. So what we propose, which I've shared with everyone here and with the applicant, is a townhouse development with 32 units of varying sizes in 2 rows along a central street. Our proposal would replace 4 old houses outside the city with 32 new townhouses inside the city, contributing to its property tax base. Our plan includes a bus stop with a shelter and a city easement for a future greenway connector from the Lead Mine Road sidewalk to a proposed future greenway along the creek just east of the property. This connection is important because it would provide the only greenway access for hundreds of residents in the super block west of Lead Mine, east of Creedmoor, north of Glenwood, and south of Millbrook. And we'd like to do our part to help all the community access Raleigh's magnificent greenway system. In response to Mr. Graywall's October 14th email seeking our feedback on the possibility of townhomes on the site, we asked him to consider our plan. But at the same time, this is important because this was not stated accurately by the applicants moments ago. We replied to Mr. Graywall that we would support without reservation his first scenario of up to 36 units, and that we would be willing to talk about the parameters of a project up to 54 units. We did not say it's our plan or nothing. In talking with our neighbors, however, we emphasized that Mr. Graywall had not committed to building townhomes, but we were very pleased that he seemed to be considering it. So we were then surprised and disappointed when Mr. Graywall followed up October 22nd by saying that he was not interested in building townhomes after all. His email stated his belief that the current property owners would rather develop the site by right at R4 than for townhomes. Although we don't understand the economic logic of that, of course, we would support the construction of R4 single-family homes there. For now, though, we do ask you to deny the rezoning cases before you, and our offer to embrace up to 36 townhomes stands, or to talk about up to 54, and we would support waiving the customary moratorium to allow for such a case. We think that would be a reasonable result. It's not what all of our neighbors want. It's obviously not what the applicant hoped for in this case, but we think it would serve the interests of Raleigh quite well. So thank you for your time in this case and again today.
Thank you, Matthew. Alan, do we have anyone else who would like to speak?
We have some other individuals that I can check with individually, ma'am. Molly McBride. Did you want to
I'd
speak on
like-
this topic?
Yeah, I would like to defer my time to our steering committee.
And Mr. John Hanratty, did you want to speak on this topic, sir?
I'd like to defer my time as well.
That's how we have, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we will bring this back to the table then for discussion. Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the committee. I want to first express appreciation to our staff for all the work they've put in, all the time and effort on behalf of the neighbors and the applicant in this case. As you've heard, it hasn't been fun and it hasn't been easy for anybody involved. I continue to believe this case has brought to light some significant areas of potential improvement in our rezoning process and matters of policy. I somewhat regret that we didn't take the opportunity to delve into those, but I'll reserve comment on those issues for another day and time. Today, I believe it's time to bring this case to a close. And we have in front of us two competing visions for the future of this site, townhome development and a multi-story congregate care facility. Either one would be a great win for increased density in our city, but it's my view that the townhouse proposal represents the better view of the future of this site. It's not in the Crabtree growth area. It would provide a nice transition to the single-family home neighborhoods, and we've got the ongoing challenge of Fillcrest Road. Absent further discussion from the committee, I'm ready to make a motion to report this matter to the council with the committee's recommendation that the case be denied.
Okay, does anyone else have comment? Okay, Councilmember Cox.
My only comment is that I will second Mr. Buffkin's motion.
Okay, so Mr. Buffkin, is that a formal motion?
Yes, ma'am, I move that the case be reported back to council with the recommendation of the committee that it be denied.
Okay, and seconded by Councilmember Cox. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, that is a 3-1 vote, and this will go to council at our first meeting in November. Please include this under special items. Okay. Thank you, everyone. This has been a long, arduous process. I want to thank everybody who has engaged and had their voices heard. I also want to acknowledge that when we started, this was a 7-story building with 350 units. There has been compromise along the way. And I understand and respect what the neighbors are asking for, which is a townhome development. We will see if that's where we end up when this goes before the full council. So I just want to say, again, thank you to everybody. And I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.